Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to kick off today's session with our first slide, which is the cover for Chapter 3, Fundamentals of Research, Mock Questions. Today, we'll explore key concepts that form the foundation of research, and I'll be walking you through some sample questions to reinforce your understanding. We'll cover essential principles, common challenges, and helpful strategies. So, let's get started and make this an engaging and insightful journey into research fundamentals. All right, so when we look at the first step in the research process, it's all about defining the research problem. This means clearly understanding what you want to investigate or solve. It's like setting a clear goal before you start. Without this step, the rest of the process can become confusing or unfocused. Now, from the options on the slide, data analysis, report writing, defining the research problem, and interpreting results. It's important to recognize that the foundation of any good research begins with defining that problem or objective. That's what guides everything else you do. So, in essence, the first step is really about understanding exactly what question you need to answer or what issue you want to address. This clarity helps ensure that your subsequent steps, like data collection and analysis, are aligned and meaningful. When we look at fundamental analysis, the focus is on understanding the underlying performance of a company, the industry it operates in, and the overall economy. This means examining factors like financial health, management quality, and economic trends that can influence the company's value. It's about going beyond just the stock price movements or market rumors. Instead, we dig into financial statements, economic indicators, and industry conditions to gain a deeper insight. This approach helps us make more informed investment decisions by understanding the true worth of a company based on its fundamentals. So, in essence, fundamental analysis is about studying the core factors that drive a company's performance, rather than just the market noise or short-term price patterns. Now, let's take a closer look at the different types of analysis involved in the investment decision process. First, we have economic analysis, which involves evaluating the overall state of the economy. Then, industry analysis focuses on understanding the specific sector or industry that a company operates in. Next is company analysis, where we dive into the fundamentals of a particular business. And finally, technical analysis, which is a separate approach that looks at price patterns and market trends. In the context of the top-down approach, we typically start with the economy, then move to industry, and finally analyze the individual company. So, when we see a question asking which of these isn't part of the top-down method, the key point is that technical analysis doesn't quite fit into this sequence. It's a different approach altogether, focusing on market behavior rather than macroeconomic or industry fundamentals. Therefore, for this slide, the main takeaway is that while economic, industry, and company analyses are the pillars of the top-down approach, technical analysis stands apart as a separate method. Now, let's look at what a hypothesis truly is. Essentially, a hypothesis is best described as a tentative assumption to be tested. It's not a final conclusion or an established fact. Rather, it's a starting point that guides our research process. When we formulate a hypothesis, we're making an educated guess about the relationship between variables, and then we design experiments or studies to test whether that guess holds true. This makes it a critical component of the scientific method because it provides a clear focus for our investigation. So, in the context of research, a hypothesis acts as a hypothesis, 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 as a testable statement that shapes our entire research process. Now, let's look at what secondary data really means. The correct answer here is B. Secondary data refers to data that has already been collected for some other purpose, but is now being used for research. For example, this could include annual reports, data from the Reserve Bank of India, or other existing sources. This is different from data collected directly by the analyst, which is known as primary data. It's also different from data created through personal interviews or surveys, which are primary sources as well. The key point to remember is that secondary data is already available. It's like using existing resources rather than gathering new information from scratch. This can save time and effort, but it's important to assess how relevant and reliable that data is for your specific research needs. So, in summary, secondary data is essentially data that's already out there, ready to be utilized for analysis. When considering secondary data, one of the main limitations is that it may not always be current or tailored specifically to our research needs. This means that while secondary data can be useful, it might be outdated or not perfectly aligned with the particular questions we want to answer. It's important to keep this in mind because relying on data that isn't up-to-date or relevant can lead to inaccurate conclusions. So, even though secondary data is often more accessible and less expensive, we should always evaluate its timeliness and applicability to ensure our research remains accurate and reliable. Now, when we talk about the bottom-up research approach, we're starting at the most detailed level, individual companies. From there, we analyze these companies to understand their strengths, weaknesses, and growth potential. Once we have a solid grasp of the company level, we expand our view to the industry as a whole, seeing how these companies fit into larger market trends. Finally, we look at the broader economic environment to understand how macroeconomic factors might influence our investments. This approach is very much about building our analysis from the ground up, beginning with the company itself. It's a focused way to identify promising investment opportunities based on solid company fundamentals before considering wider industry and economic factors. Let's focus on what should be avoided in a research report. Slide 9 highlights that including personal opinions without evidence is a big no-no. Reports need to be grounded in facts, data, and objective analysis. When we include personal opinions that aren't supported by evidence, it can introduce bias and undermine the credibility of the report. This is especially important because our goal is to provide clear, unbiased insights. We want readers to trust our findings and conclusions, and that only happens when everything is backed up with solid evidence. So always remember, reports should be evidence-based and free from personal bias, ensuring they're reliable and professional. Now, let's look at some common research methods used in our analysis. We have expert interviews, focus group meetings, ratio analysis, and management discussions. Among these, the key point to remember is that ratio analysis involves numerical data, making it a quantitative method. This means it relies on measurable, statistical information rather than opinions or perceptions. Quantitative research methods like ratio analysis help us analyze data objectively and identify trends or patterns. This is important because it allows us to make data-driven decisions, which ties into our overall theme of thorough, accurate business analysis. So, whenever you're asked about quantitative methods, think of those that involve numbers and quantifiable data, like ratio analysis. So, when we look at types of data, one key category is primary data, which is answer B. Primary data is original and first-hand, meaning it's data you collect yourself directly from the source. For example, if you conduct a survey or interview, you're gathering primary data because it's fresh and specific to your needs. This contrasts with secondary data, which has already been collected by someone else and is readily available. Now, to connect this to our overall theme, understanding the different types of data helps us choose the right approach for our research. Since primary data is collected firsthand, it offers more control and relevance, but it also requires more effort. And just to clarify, the question on this slide asks about data collected directly through surveys. That's a classic example of primary data because you're engaging directly with respondents to gather new information. When evaluating management quality, the key approach we look at is qualitative analysis. This means we're assessing factors that are not easily quantifiable, like leadership skills, strategic vision, and decision-making capabilities. These aspects are crucial because strong management can significantly influence a company's success and future prospects. In the context of our overall analysis, qualitative factors like management evaluation complement other methods such as technical analysis, macroeconomic research, and financial accounting. But it's important to remember that management evaluation is distinctly qualitative. It involves judgment and insight rather than numerical data alone. So, when I say management quality is evaluated as part of qualitative analysis, I mean we're focusing on non-numeric, subjective factors that give us a deeper understanding of the company's potential. This kind of assessment helps us make more informed investment decisions by considering the human element behind the numbers. Now, let's look at the options for peer comparison. Option A is studying unrelated companies, which isn't ideal because it doesn't give us a clear picture of how a company performs within its own industry. Option C involves comparing a firm with global indices, and while that can be useful for understanding overall market trends, it doesn't tell us how a company stacks up against its direct competitors. Option D focuses solely on future prices, which isn't really about comparison at all. The correct answer is B, comparing firms within the same industry. This approach is essential because peer comparison shows us how a company performs relative to its industry competitors. It helps us identify strengths, weaknesses, and potential areas for improvement by benchmarking against similar companies. So, in the context of our overall presentation, peer comparison is a vital tool for understanding a company's position in the market and making more informed investment decisions. When defining a research objective, it's crucial to focus on clarity and measurability. On this slide, we see 4 options. The first one, vague and general, is not ideal because it doesn't give us specific direction. The third, based on opinion, can lead to biased results and isn't suitable for objective research. The fourth, unrelated to the problem, simply doesn't help us address the real issue at hand. The correct choice here is B, clear and measurable. This is because well-defined objectives that are specific and quantifiable guide us properly through the research process, ensuring that our efforts are focused and results are meaningful. Remember, having clear, measurable objectives is the foundation for effective research and accurate findings. When evaluating research, it's essential to keep our focus on objectivity. This means that research must be unbiased and fact-based. We want to ensure that the findings are driven by evidence, not by personal feelings or preconceived notions. By maintaining objectivity, we can trust that the information we gather and analyze is fair and accurate. This ties directly into the overall theme of conducting high-quality research, which is crucial for making informed decisions. On the other hand, it's important to be aware of pitfalls like emotional reasoning, bias towards a company, or selective data usage, which can distort the results. So, always prioritize objectivity to uphold the integrity of your research and ensure your conclusions are credible. Now let's look at the options on this slide. We have A, EBITDA margin, B, return on equity, C, management competence, and D, debt-equity ratio. The key question here is, which of these is a qualitative factor? What really sets management competence apart is that it's based on qualities, skills, and judgment, things we can't easily measure with numbers. That's why it's considered qualitative. In contrast, the other options, like EBITDA margin, return on equity, and the debt-equity ratio, are all quantitative measures. They involve numbers and ratios that give us tangible data. So the most important point here is recognizing that management quality is a qualitative factor because it reflects the skills and effectiveness of the management team, which are harder to quantify, but just as crucial for a company's success. This understanding helps us see why both qualitative and quantitative factors are essential when evaluating a business.